and welcome back to The Bryce is Right. I am Bryce Aroni, and I do my best here to promote positive atheism and secular humanism. And one of the ways of doing that is by having positive conversations, or better conversations, if you will, with people who come from different backgrounds and different worldviews, different ideologies, and frankly, different beliefs about religion, politics, and so on and so forth. And doing this in order to find common ground and focus on areas where we can relate to each other on a human level. And I like to refer to that as humanistic reasoning. And, I personally think that this is really one of the best ways to facilitate better understanding and appreciation for humanism. So, to that end, I have another Common Ground episode for you. It's a bit unusual for me to have two of these in a row like this, but I've been fortunate enough to have several Christian theists in a row who are willing to come on and have a discussion with me. And today's episode will also feature an open discussion in the second half featuring Sonny, Oz, Eddie from Brute Facts. And with that, let me talk about our guest a little bit. Our guest is a friend of the Atheist Network group from our regular Discord chat. His name is James Benton. He is a Christian who owns the YouTube channel Meaning Forge, which seeks to explore how people find and make meaning in their lives. So without further ado, James, come on down. Or should I call you Jim?
Doesn't matter, man. Either way.
Welcome
Thanks
to the
for having
show.
me.
Yeah. Thanks for being a part of this. And I'm grateful that you agree to, we've talked a couple times in the TANG Discord, and this is kind of really the first formal discussion we're having on anything. So I don't know. I found it interesting that you like to hang out in there with us. And I was curious about your perspective on, some of the conversations that we do have. But before we get into any of that, I'm sure the audience here who may be being introduced to you for the first time would like to know a little bit about you. So who is James Benton? Who are you? What do you believe? How'd you come to believe it?
Yeah, so I guess who am I? Well, I'm just a random guy trying to figure out how to make his way in the world, just like any other person, right? So at the end of the day, it's kind of the blunt force trauma of that. Navigating the world is not easy. I am a makeshift poet, a historian. I'm dabbling my foot in economy or economics. I am a logistician and a supply chain guy professionally. And I guess I get to say I was a veteran, or I am a veteran now. So it's pretty awesome.
A veteran of what?
The good old, well, I mean, lots of things. So I like that one. A veteran of the Army, from the Army, and a veteran of just trying to navigate a bunch of different ideas, actually, I think, and trying to come out.
You said you were a veteran of the Army, the United States Army, I'm guessing, right?
Yes.
You were American. Okay. So first of all, hua, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And so that's something that we share in common. I'm a veteran of the Air Force, so we may have some little inter-service rivalry with that.
Oh, we have to. I mean, you're just my little brother. That's all. It's okay.
Yeah, that's right. Because you guys came, first. But you know what? You have to be smarter to get into the Air Force. So we may have to, see who has the bigger brain.
That's fine. That's all. That's fine. I tried the Navy, and they didn't like me. So
I can't swim, so I didn't even try. So veteran of the Army, and the first thing you said was, well, I didn't mean to interrupt you because you may have 10 more things.
I'm kind of rambling too.
You're a poet, a historian, a vet. What else are you? Is that it?
I mean, I'm just a guy trying to figure out his way in the world at the end of the day. That's the best way to look at it.
So poetry, that one is very interesting. What kind of poetry do you?
I dabble in my own little non-rhyming form. I guess I use it more as ideas. So like I'm able to use it to push abstract ideas a little bit further or as far as I can reach it with it. So that way I can almost understand it better in some regards. So it's really interesting.
Are these existing abstract ideas or ideas that you originate?
It's a mix of existing and stuff like that. So, for example, um, I recently wrote a poem called "The Age of Discovery,"
Mhm.
right? And so that the setting is it's kind of like 1492, like you start sailing and all that fun stuff. It's sailing based, but you're also looking at the mind, and it's not an age of discovery as far as like it's discovering other things. It's discovering different ideas, and how you reconcile those ideas. And then on top of that, um, it deals with some cases of death and a few other things. So it's really again, it's just a method that I could sit there and write something out and try and push something as far back as I can, because I allude to like Aeneas, Virgil's Aeneas. I allude to Homer's Odyssey and Achilles and so on and so forth. So there's lots of different things that are coming from that.
And it sounds like the settings are a mixture between actual historical settings, and fantasy, well, or myths, I should say.
Yeah. So it pulls in myths. So like in one, I write it's one I'm writing. It's called "The Candle in the Dark," and what that alludes to is Prometheus giving fire to man, right, and what that would represent. And at the very end, I ask, so Prometheus was able to survive the day-to-day torture because he was looking up and he saw every star in the sky like a candle in the dark.
Mm. We need to have future conversations about Prometheus, because I love Prometheus, and I actually belong to another organization called Promethean Secular Frontier, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but
I've watched a few videos from
yeah, you need to get in there with us and educate us as the historians perspective on this.
I'm not that good.
Pardon?
I'm not that good. I'm a layman in just about every aspect of it.
So but you know what? That's fine, because most people are laymen. Layman is a word that refers to the majority of people, right? So exactly. Most of us are laymen in some way, and but you know, I could be a layman in history, and you could be, but that doesn't mean that we know the same things. You know, the reason we're laymen is because I know some stuff and you know other stuff. But when we put our knowledge together, then we damn near become experts.
It's like what is it? Distributed cognition or something like that?
I don't know that terminology, but it sounds good, and you could just baffle me with bullshit with that. You know, yeah, distributive.
I wouldn't do that. I try to keep things as clear as possible. Not always successful, but I try.
What is your YouTube channel about? You have Meaning Forge, and it I looked at, you know, your the bio you gave me, and basically helping people to find meaning. And so how do you do that? Is it just exploring other people's ideas about what their lives mean, or do you offer?
Yeah, so let me just, I guess the simple way to put this is, the Meaning Forge is like, so it's how you find and make meaning, and I'm using some blacksmith type of imagery here, right? And the idea here is it's an experiment. One, like I don't claim to know anything about it. I just claim that I'm trying to find it out, right? I'm trying to find some underlying, maybe ontology is the right word, I don't know, ideas of how we find and make meaning in our life. And I do that through interviewing people, right? And using the symbology of the Meaning Forge, which is a hammer, a sword, a pen, and a crown, where we talk about someone's life and we talk about their life, and we hopefully try to pull some themes that they've seen and how they're acting now, and then what they want their legacy to be.
Do you think that, speaking of meaning, do you think that there is any intrinsic meaning to life, or do you think that meaning is just something that we assign to our own lives?
That's a great question that I probably should refrain from answering a little bit, just because there's a lot of, I really don't know on the surface. I think
maybe this will help you if I elaborate, because the reason that I ask is whenever I read something that says that they're about trying to find meaning, it would suggest that one, they don't have it or they haven't found it yet, right? And so that it sounds like people are on this path to figuring out what the meaning is. And so there's either a meaning that is there to find, or there's a meaning that we have to create. And it's that version of finding it, creating it. So what do you think is more appropriate to what you are trying to do? Are you trying to help people find? Okay.
It's both, because meaning can be revealed as well. So like you find it, and the sequence of events. I don't want to get into what comes first. I'll just say, like, I think there's two aspects to it. It's revealed to you and you find it. So I say find and make, and you make it if you're maybe aware of that's what you want, or you're disciplining yourself to achieve.
Is it would it be fair to say that part of finding the meaning includes figuring out whether there's an intrinsic meaning to find versus something that needs to be created? Would that be included in that? In that paragraph?
Yeah. I mean, and that's what I'm trying to do, right? And so I'm trying to find if there is an underlying foundation for how we make or find meaning, or something like that. I mean, and not only that, but that changes all the time. It changes almost by generation, even down to the individual. It changes. So
yeah.
And that I think is one of the most beautiful parts about it. Like, everyone has different meaning in their life that they can find and make.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So before we go a little bit further, I'm going to override Sunny on this point and switch to this view, just because when it's side by side, I like that one. Sorry, that's my OCD kicking in. But I do want to give shout outs to kind of the people that are watching. So we've got Glenn Davis, which is, I'm not sure if that's a new name or not, but I don't recognize it. So thanks for watching, Glenn. And if you've been here all the while, get a little bit more vocal so I can get familiar with you. But if you're new to the show, then welcome. We've got Asexual Atheist. What's going on? John Christian. That's another name I don't think I'm familiar with, but welcome. Kathy Humanist. Who else? We got Sunny Shell, who's back there, of course. James Smith. Yeah. And of course, we got the Nightbot dishing out all this lovely information. There's Murder Shed Steve back there. And let's see. Oh, heard that James Benton is a half Christian like Oz. We're going to talk about that coming up soon.
Well, also Murder Shed Steve. So if I'm a half Christian like Oz, right? Whatever. That's my bedtime alarm, which that's not going to happen tonight. So I'm also so sorry, like a half murderer like Murder Shed Steve, because I have my axe behind me and a hammer. So I mean,
there you go. So yeah, more common ground all over the place. So I appreciate all of you interacting in the chat. And by the way, if anybody has questions tonight for James or myself, please feel free to leave them. As normal. Super chats are appreciated, and they will be prioritized. Okay, so back to you, James. Speaking of that, because Steve did bring up something, if I'm not mistaken, first of all, you are a theist, correct?
Yes. Okay. I guess if you want to get precise, I'm a monotheistic believer in the Christian, we'll say it, the Christian God.
Okay, it's an interesting way that you put that, but
as precise as I could.
Sure. Now, what? Well, I guess I should start with, how did you come to believe what you currently do? And I'm trying to change the way I ask that question, because the simple way to ask that is, why do you believe what you do? But sometimes that comes off as a little,
it's okay
or whatever. So
how did
you come to the position that you are currently at?
Okay, so talking about narratives of life, right? So I did grow up in a Christian church and a few other things, right? I actually had a good dose of the big three, right? Catholicism, Protestantism, and I call it big three baptism, because Baptists are crazy. Like they're just fundamentally a whole nother brand in themselves.
Well, I'm glad you clarified what you meant by big three, because I know the big three as Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. So I would have been wrong.
Well, within Christianity, I would say it's Protestant Orthodoxy and Catholicism.
I would agree with that, but that's not what you just said.
I said within. Okay, that's okay. So
Baptist,
within
Protestant.
Christianity, So within Christianity, I got a big dose of three, pretty much their own.
Okay.
Just don't count Orthodoxy because that's just not really big in America. I can get into all the baptized things, all the confirmation things like that. That's neither here nor there. College, I was pretty skeptical and had a crisis of faith, which I've talked about in normalizing atheism's interview with me back a few months ago. So go check that out. And I had a crisis of faith. I became very skeptical, and the beautiful part about it is it created a dialectic process in which I could kind of start to test these ideas and be skeptical and kind of, again, find my way through the world and hopefully live a good life, whatever that means. So as far as like what led me to believe directly, there's we can call them personal experiences. I've done my own studies and where I've kind of arrived at a deistic position at the surface, and then from there I have kind of said, okay, Christianity I think makes the most sense.
So did you I just want to make sure I'm getting my timeline or sequencing of events correctly. Did you say that you started off as basically an amalgam of the three different positions, Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant?
Well, by the time I graduated from high school, I would say that.
So you were adopting beliefs from basically all three. What were your parents, or what were they trying to raise you as?
Well, my parents are Southern Baptist and Protestant, and I went to a Catholic high school for a portion of that as well, and that's pretty much that's my experience with all of them.
So just as part of your upbringing, you were exposed to the different types of Christianity, which kind of influenced your beliefs. And
yes.
Okay. And so it sounds like from there you didn't really settle necessarily on one of them, but it did give you kind of a basic God belief. And then you started investigating, it sounded like deism.
I would say that God belief was challenged, right? And I arrived at deism on my own because like I went through a skeptical phase, what you call a crisis of faith. I never went, I guess, full-blown atheism, but I did arrive at a deistic proposition. And then from there, through studying other mythological frameworks, other essentially religions the best I could, and surveying those, again, I arrived back at Christianity. So I guess we're kind of trapped in some regards, but it was good.
Okay. So let me ask you about, since you seem to have settled on Christianity, and I do want to ask you some broader questions about theism as well, but what is your take on the Bible? And I guess the first part of that question should be, have you read the Bible? Have you read the whole thing? And then if you have, are you a biblical literalist? Kind of what's your view on?
So let me answer this one question really quick. Biblical literalist? No.
Okay.
The Bible is a collection of writings, and yes, I've at least read it through once. And from that, my memory is not always perfect, so I'm sure that you still know it better than I do, or many people do. So at the end of the day, the Bible is a work that has a lot of narratives or meta narratives that I think are true. Now, it doesn't mean that the ark, as far as Noah's Ark, is real. Like, that's absurd. It doesn't mean that evolution isn't real. It doesn't mean that the Levitical law is appropriate.
So
Yeah.
this is okay. Now that's interesting. I'm a little conflicted here because as an atheist, I want to clap and applaud and kind of
Mhm.
give the the metaphorical thank God, since I don't believe in one. But the skeptic in me is compelled to ask, as you've identified as a Christian, if you don't believe in these stories from the Bible, what is your foundational belief that there was a Jesus Christ who, and maybe I should be asking you the question, do you believe that there was a literal Jesus Christ who was resurrected, or who walked on water, or did miraculous things?
Yeah. So I can't prove that Jesus did miracles. Like,
Okay.
I can't do that. I can't even prove that he rose from the dead. Now, what I think there's strong evidence for the existence of Jesus. Like, I understand the mythicist arguments. I understand some of Richard Carrier's arguments. Um, at the end of the day, there was either a character or several characters named Jesus between a time frame of 100 BC to 100 AD that this person was written about.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So, but as far as your beliefs about the resurrection, do you believe that that actually happened, or do you think that
I,
that part is just a story that was
I
meant
can't
to?
prove it. So I mean, I guess, what do you mean by belief?
Well, so there's things that I can't, like, I can't prove that there are actually aliens existing elsewhere in the universe, right? Because there's no direct evidence of that. But I do have a belief that there is, and the basis of my belief has to do with what I understand about evolution, the natural elements and the
Mhm.
cosmos, the elements required for life, the vastness of it, the right distances of planets from stars, and the probability of that happening on another world. In my mind, it seems highly probable, based on what we do know, that there would be aliens. So therefore I believe in aliens, but I have no evidence of aliens. So if someone were to ask me, hey, can you prove aliens exist? Of course not, because there's no evidence of aliens, but I still believe them. So I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, do you have a belief in the resurrection of Christ despite the lack of evidence, or would you say that you're skeptical about that claim but still
Yeah,
believe in the
I said I
existence?
can't prove it, and I have to be skeptical of that claim. Like, I cannot prove with any level of decent fidelity that Christ arose from the dead.
Okay. Would you describe yourself as a typical Christian?
Oh no, I'm the worst kind.
Well, okay, that's interesting. How do you mean?
Oh, I'm just because I do question it, and
I
I
would
and
say by the way, I would strongly disagree with you, just because
it's a joke though.
I know it's a joke, but the problem is, and I'm glad you clarified that it's a joke. But the problem is we get theists watching too, and we get Christians watching, and Muslims, and all kinds of people of other faiths. And sometimes they hear jokes like that they take seriously and take as a win, as
Of
though it
course.
makes sense. And so I'm always, just in case anybody was tempted to do that, I would say that you're one of the best Christians. One, the fact that you're employing skepticism, and two, that you seem to be caring about people, and
Mhm.
I know that that's something that many Christians say that they are supposed to do. It's not something that I often observe most of them doing. And in your case, I have evidence that you do that with your podcast. So you are one of the best Christians. But with respect to your beliefs, you would consider yourself an atypical Christian?
Yeah, I would be very atypical.
Okay. And would that have to do with your lack of, not literacy, but biblical literalness? relative
Well, I
to
mean,
most?
it's a combination of probably literalness and
Mhm.
the fact that science, the invariableness of science, right, makes it very hard to say that someone can rise from the dead.
Yeah. And in addition to many of the other biblical
Oh
claims too.
yes, like
Right.
many claims.
Okay. So, okay. So then, if the Bible is not to be taken literally, so to speak,
Hmm.
why Christianity? I kind of put in the thumbnail as a title,
Yeah.
why Christianity. So I'm slipping in the question at this point, but it seems to be relevant to me because it's difficult. I used to be a Christian, and I would say if someone came to me back when I was a Christian and told me what you just told me, I would be very confused, and I would be wondering what your basis is for even calling yourself a Christian if you're not believing in what the Bible says. So, like, why did you choose Christianity, or why did you decide, based on your investigation, that this was the religion that made the most sense relative to any of the other religious claims out there?
So maybe this is due to lack of historical record, right? Because I think I need to give that a very clear prop, because many of our myths from other eras are just kind of gone. Like we
Mhm.
have echoes of them, and like Norse and the Edda. We have some Sumerian stuff that we've been able to translate, so on and so forth. Um, and from that, we there are perennial truths. Like I think now they're mythological in nature, but it doesn't necessarily say that it's a science driven like truth. It's a I would say more like a maybe a human truth that comes from the Bible and its meta narratives.
We have our first super chat from Asexual Atheist for 4.99. Thanks for being here, Jim. How do you determine metaphor from what is real in the narrative?
I mean, end of the day, you can take it all as metaphor because you can classify it all as art.
How familiar, well, have you studied in depth any of the other major the two other monotheistic religions that are popular in our country, Judaism and Islam? Have you like read the Quran, or researched any of the Torah or any of the Jewish or Islamic claims?
I haven't really gotten into the Torah as much, besides basic conversations.
Hmm.
I think that it's interesting, even from the Jewish perspective. The Quran I'm familiar with from more of a political standpoint. And what I mean by that is the political history of the religion and its impact in the southern Mediterranean. Um, and you said other like so. I think those were the big two.
Yeah,
But
well,
I mean,
those are
I'm exposed to them.
those are probably the other two in the monotheistic God
Mhm.
of Abraham trifecta, so to speak.
Yeah,
And so, given the fact that you've identified as Christian, and you gave your reasons why, but I'm wondering if you've compared it to some of the other claims
yeah,
about this God.
yeah. I
And
mean, I've done some very loose Quran studies, not to the level of detail because I haven't gotten to it yet.
right.
Like for example, I've read most of the world's mythologies as of late. I did it again through Bernard Shaw's work. And then currently the Quran uh, is on my bookshelf. Fun fact. So it's behind me. I just have to get through it. And I think there's plenty of time for that.
Okay. Is it possible that after getting through it, you would convert to Islam?
There's a possibility. I would never say never, because
Okay.
oddly enough, when I say never, things happen, and the way that I said they would never happen. Uh,
Right. Based on your historical knowledge
yeah,
of Islam, do you think that would be a likelihood in the future, or
yeah. From the
unlikely?
historical standpoint, I'd be very cautious of it. I, I,
Okay.
I, I, I don't know it well enough to sit there and really kind of nail down and stuff. My initial impressions, though, are not that good, but I'm exploring it.
Okay, fair enough. And this may or may not be the last Christian specific question
Yeah, sure.
I ask you. It kind of depends on how the conversation evolves from here. But on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is zero confidence at all and 10 is absolutely sure you know that this is true, how certain are you that Jesus Christ died for your sins?
Okay. So from a literal standpoint, I that would be like a 1, like a 0 almost, because I don't know. Again, I can't prove the miracles or anything like that. Now, there's a interesting truth there from a metaphorical perspective, at least from the story perspective, that a psychotechnology of grace came from that idea.
I'm sorry, say it again.
The psychotechnology of grace came from that idea. And what I mean by psychotechnology is a mind tool, essentially.
It came from the idea of
grace.
Okay.
Which is attributed with Jesus Christ dying on the cross, which I think is an important technology to help us at least navigate through the world.
Okay. So moving out to, I guess, general theism then, because this is probably the biggest area. It's difficult for me to find anything to really disagree with you about, with everything that you've said about your beliefs specific to Christianity, which is rare. That's certainly not what I was expecting at all. I was expecting, you to put up a little bit more of a fight, but I guess, but I guess we have more common ground with respect.
I'm sorry.
No, but you know what? The name of the episode is Common Ground, and so this is just another piece of evidence that we cannot and should not and ought not judge people based on the label that they choose for themselves, because, it's like judging a book by their cover. You call yourself a Christian, I call myself an atheist, but so far we've agreed on just about everything, And so if I were to not have this conversation with you and just judge you based on your label, I would have a completely different impression about you and you about me, possibly, so one of the reasons
I would agree with that. And it's funny you say that too, because even in the only 8 interviews that I have so far, and in some of those conversations, like, we can have completely different viewpoints on any number of things, but when we boil it down to that individual's almost dreams and aspirations of what they want to do in life, for example, we all want almost the same things. I just find it amazing, personally.
Yeah. So someone just kind of got on me a little bit for asking a 1 to 10 question about beliefs, and they didn't like that so much. So I'm going to ask another one. Scale from 1 to 10, and this will be my last one, I promise.
You're good, man.
Not piss people off too much, but on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is not certain at all, 10 is you know it to be true for a fact, how certain are you that a God exists?
Oh, this is a great question. So I don't think I want to give it the dignity of a 1 to 10 response. Just because I think it shouldn't be boiled down to a 1 to 10. How do I know if a God exists? I guess the simple answer is I could be very wrong. So if that's the case, and if that is the end all be all of that, and I could be very wrong that a God could exist or not exist, then I don't know. I would be kind of at a loss on a 1 to 10 scale. So
the question relates more to, and I appreciate the fact that you are willing to say that you don't know, which to me is one of the most important questions in revealing the identity of a person as a skeptic, to say, I don't know, so kudos for admitting that you don't know what you don't know. Right. But so the question I'm asking, I guess it relates more towards beliefs, because knowledge is only a subset of belief, and we have all kinds of beliefs about things that we don't know. Right. So as you've identified yourself as a believer, how strongly do you believe And like, are you really confident that there is a God, or is it like 50-50? There could be, there may
I
not
mean,
be.
I would tell you that probably a 1% chance. But that
1%
1%
chance.
chance still could mean that there is a God that exists. The
Okay.
only issue is I literally can't see it, touch it, or measure it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hard part.
Now so it's interesting to me because I think that, again, if I were to judge your responses based on my former Christian self, I would be hard pressed to even recognize you as a Christian. I think that you would fit the label agnostic, in my opinion. Do you consider yourself agnostic?
No, I don't think so. I think it's it's funny, labels. I don't necessarily think I'm super, I fall into that category, but I also don't fall into a category all my own either. So if you were to bucket me into something, it's probably a combination of Christian and agnostic. Whether or not the sequence of those words would probably matter, but I don't know.
I would have identified myself as an agnostic Christian when I was one. So I don't think that that's problematic or contradictory or paradoxical at all. You know, if you start by saying, I don't know, but I still believe in Jesus Christ for the, remission of sins and for my salvation, you are literally an agnostic Christian,
Yeah. Here's a question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
How do you take the term Christian atheist?
It depends. It depends on how the person using it defines Christian and how they define atheist. Because again, these are labels that have multiple usages. I don't believe that there is any like single objective intrinsic meaning applicable to any of those words. And so they mean different things depending on depending on who's using the term, right? So it would depend on what the person means when they say Christian. And depending on how they define it, I would either consider it a cogent label or a paradoxical one. So, for example, if someone were to tell me that they believe an atheist is a person who believes that no God exists, and then they define Christian as someone who believes that Jesus Christ was God in the flesh who rose from the dead for their sins, and they describe themselves as a Christian atheist or an atheistic Christian, I would say that that is paradoxical based on their own definition. However, if they defined atheist as a person who lacks a belief in the existence of God or gods, and they define Christian as a person who believes in following the moral teachings of Jesus Christ, who inspired people to live in a certain way, then I could accept that because they're using it in such a way that it doesn't necessarily contradict itself.
Okay, so let's make sure I have that right. So if they're let's just say Christian atheists, and that's typically how I've seen it. If they're adhering to the values, what they think of Christianity, but they don't believe in God, then that makes sense. Is that correct?
That would make sense under those definitions, under the second two definitions that I gave. And so I don't like to straw man anybody or assume that they're a certain thing just because they've used a certain label about themselves. Kind of like going back to the beginning of this conversation, when you identified yourself as a theist and a Christian, but it comes to find out you're an atypical both of those things, and we probably agree on a lot more than we disagree with, right? So just because a person has a label that they're applying to themselves doesn't mean that you know what the hell they're talking about. So now I do want to ask you, how do you think that you are perceived by other Christians in terms of given everything that you believe and how you've described yourself?
Let's just say this: I'm already getting Facebook messages, so let's just leave that alone for now.
You're getting Facebook messages as of the duration of this conversation?
Yes.
Or just
literally, okay. I think once I dropped the God, the we don't know if a God exists bomb, I got messages.
Now, Jim, I have to. It's certainly never my intention to put people on the spot to where now they have to come out or explain or defend themselves to people who are close to them. So it was my assumption that your beliefs and your ideology was known, but that may have been an error on my part. So are you revealing a lot of these ideas about yourself for the first time publicly?
I don't think so. I mean, I've been pretty honest in many ways. So I'd hope I've been relatively consistent. Even with my previous interviews with good old Pasta Mike at Normalizing Atheism and Oz a few months ago. So, I mean, I don't necessarily, the writing is on the wall. I don't think it's new.
Okay. Well, you certainly frequent the Atheist Network group Discord chats.
Yeah.
Which was going to be my last question before we move into open discussion. But
yeah, sure.
Why do you hang out with us?
Yeah, that's a great question, right?
Before you answer, well, I'm glad you think it was a good question. I thought it would have been a better question if we differed more on our beliefs and if you align more towards the type of Christianity that I see as typical. But now that you've answered so many of the other questions in a different way, I don't know that the question is as relevant anymore. It seems pretty obvious, but I'll let you go ahead and answer anyway. You seem to have a decent time, hanging out with us, and we talk about it's majority atheists. You're in there sometimes. We have Eddie from Eddie Brute Facts come in there every now and again, and he's going to be joining us in the discussion coming up soon as well. But why do you like to hang out with us, and what do you get out of it?
Yeah, so that again, it's a great question, and I kind of adhere to the idea of a dialectical process, right, or something to that effect, where you create like a virtual engine to better yourself, or this is called virtue. This is called any number of things, right? Heavily influenced by Aristotle, Plato, and that's you guys are the opposing viewpoint, unfortunately, or fortunately, really is what it is, and so I get to seek understanding, right? So I'm not necessarily trying to go in and evangelize. Like that's kind of not always useful. But I can sit there and try and understand other viewpoints, and from understanding other viewpoints, I can improve mine, and I can also, I think, maybe learn something that's important.
I think I already know the question to this answer, but you've surprised me at every other question, so I'm not going to assume too much. Do you think that it is the duty of Christians to evangelize?
I would say at some point, yes. Now, the methodology for evangelization is the problem, I would think.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that you're still exploring that method as you are still exploring your beliefs?
I mean, yeah, that's fair to say. And what I would say as far as evangelizing is it doesn't really help to go around saying, you're going to burn in fire and brimstone. It doesn't always help. That's been around for millennia almost, and or actually more than that. And it's had mixed results as far as that's concerned. The perennial truths are there in the Bible that can be used, but they also have to be. You just can't. I don't know. I don't think blunt force works, and I think that you should live by example if that's what you're going to do, and not by hypocritical type of things. And typically speaking,
and when you say live by example, what example beyond the civil discourse that we're having right now, what example do you think that you are trying to set for other people, whether they're Christian or non-Christian?
Well, you need to question things, right? You have to. You should create a dialectical process, at least at some level, and engage, everything to kind of to help understand people. And I'm a fan of people convince themselves, not people convincing people. So typically it's better to understand people versus go at them with a book. So what is that? Stephen Covey, rule number 5? and the 7 habits for highly successful people. Seek understanding before seeking to be understood.
How old are you, Jim?
How old do you think I am?
Well, I think that you're young, which is this intended to be a compliment because you seem young to me, but you seem wise beyond what I think your years are. But I could be wrong, and I'm terrible at guessing people's ages.
Oh, you're good. I'm 30.
Okay. I don't know where I was going with that. I had a follow up, but you threw me off there. We are at the 46-minute mark, which is close. I'm gonna go ahead and flip it to open discussion now because we have a couple of other panelists that would like to, I suspect, have a conversation. I wanted to do this in this episode because we talk a lot about our discords and the fact that we do these after parties after the show, but none of them are ever recorded or preserved for, new viewers to see kind of how we interact. And I thought it would be fun to do that on a topic like this, where this is what we're all about, having
let's do it.
Civil conversation. So let's go into open discussion. Hey, look at that. We got Sunny Shell, we got Oz, we got Eddie Brute Facts. What's going on, guys?
Damn it, Jim, you're out of the club.
Hey, Eddie. By the end of the day, I'll be back in the club.
I saw, I could see Eddie backstage shaking his head, and I wasn't sure if he was doing it sarcastically or seriously or what. And for those of you who don't know, for some reason, Eddie is also a Christian. I think you would probably identify as one of the agnostic Christians, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think Jim made a pretty good point with where you put the agnostic, because we're kind of in a little different position. I'm a bit more confident in the resurrection of Christ and who Christ was, but how all that fits together would be where I'm agnostic. I'm not sure, the Trinity, the incarnation, or, attributes of God, or even how we could possibly know those things.
Yeah. So did any of his answers surprise you, or was that it? I mean, I guess you kind of.
Well, I've learned to not be surprised by Jim. We've discussed before, kind of in a little bit. I didn't know, when he starts assigning numbers like 1%, I just have to call myself an atheist or an agnostic at that point. I think but I understand Jim thinks on a different level of abstractness than I do. He's got kind of a, psychological kind of philosophy that I just can't keep up with sometimes.
So you and Jim have known each other for, it sounds like, a little while, probably longer than I've known either one of you. Where would you rate yourself on that scale for that question that I asked him in terms of Jesus Christ, the resurrection of Christ first, on a 1 to 10 scale, where 0 is not confident at all and 10 is it for certainty?
Of course, it's hard to put numbers on stuff, but just for the sake of conversation, I would say that was actually a pretty good joke there earlier, Theo, making a play on the micro and macro evolution. I would say probably that God exists. I would probably somewhere in the 80% maybe, or an 8. Mm-hmm. That Christ was divine in some kind of way and was part of that, plan of atonement. If there was a plan of atonement, I would say 60, maybe 70. I can
Where do
say,
you think the threshold is for being able to legitimately call yourself a Christian. And I'm not asking you to, adopt Jim's position, because you're two different people with ideas. But for you to recognize someone as a Christian, what would they have had to answer on that scale?
I think that the only important part of someone identifying as a Christian would be where I would fit into possibly maturing or mentorship there. Other than that, I don't think that it's important to me, that because I believe that all human beings are valuable, and I don't put stock into those on my side more, or care more about those on my side. In fact, I have a special heart for atheists and agnostics because of, going through deconstruction myself at one time, being an agnostic. I understand, especially those that's been hurt by the church. And I don't try to say who is or who isn't this or that. I let people, kind of identify with how they feel. And I know people that are pragmatic Christians that don't believe in the resurrection at all, and they just follow it for, the teachings of Christ, or they think it makes them a better person, or things like that. So if they want to say they're a Christian, I'm not anybody in any position to say they're not.
Yeah, that kind of falls in line with what Jim was saying earlier, and I've switched to calling him Jim. I was calling him James through the whole show, but I see that you have Jim written down there. It kind of falls in line with what he was saying about someone using the term atheist and Christian at the same time. And my answer was, it depends on how they're defining it. But it sounds like you would be willing to accept someone as a Christian, or you would accept that label, even if they don't believe in a literal God or literal Christ, but if they believe in following kind of the ideals that they've adopted from this, the person that was written about in this Bible, whoever he was.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's things that people can argue about what was good and what wasn't. But I think overall we can agree that Jesus, talked about many good and moral things, taking care of the poor, the widows, and um, thanks, Oz, taking care of the poor, the widows, the imprisoned. We can disagree about, certain things he may have said, or context. But I think that, whatever somebody uses, needs, or uh, makes them a better person, and they're not out hurting people, and they're not taking sides and, having tribalism and, things like this, I don't see an issue with, anybody holding to any beliefs, whether they're true or false, if it, makes them a better human being to other human beings.
I know this conversation was really supposed to be about Jim, but I do have to ask you one more follow-up, given what you just said there. And it's the same question that I asked Jim a little while ago. What do you believe the role of evangelism is for a Christian? Is this something that Christians ought to do, or is that not necessary?
No, I totally reject evangelicals' idea of evangelism. I think it's exactly like, I believe it was Paul that said, we're just to give an account. When we're asked, that's it. We live our life as an example. And when somebody asks us, why do we do the things that we do? Then that's an opportunity. Or if they ask us what we think about God, or what we think about Christ, or what do we think about these spiritual things, then we talk about it. We don't go out and knock on people's doors and disturb families and beat people over the head with the Bible and chase them down the street. Like, I love the TikToks, every one of them where they're running off and it's going, let me tell you about my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And it's always a different animal, because that's what I feel like, with a lot of these evangelists. I don't think it's biblical at all. I think that the early church did a type of evangelism for spreading the church, but there's nobody in this country that hasn't heard about Jesus or doesn't know, the basic story about Jesus. I'm not going to tell them anything different than what they probably already know.
Let me bring in Sonny because I want to get your perspective. Did that conversation go kind of where you thought it would? Were any of Jim's answers surprising to you, or how'd you feel about that?
So I was very surprised. I'm surprised because Jim and I are closer than I would have anticipated in viewpoints. And I'm trying to figure out, honestly, the thought that came to my mind is, why are you still holding on to the Christian belief? That's what kept coming up to me. And I don't know if you've heard that before, if anyone has ever asked you that, but it almost seems like you're more agnostic than you are Christian. And I would almost ask Eddie the same thing. I mean, it seems like you're more of what I would consider a liberal Christian. You have much more liberal ideas. Eddie's shaking his head. I can't wait to hear your view on this. But what I'm used to is the more conservative evangelical Christian who is very dogmatic in their viewpoints. And, your views impact the actions that you take. And if you don't take actions that are based in scientific or measurable fact, then where are your views coming from? And why are you still staying with the Christian viewpoint, if that makes sense? And I'll start with Jim and then go to Eddie.
Yeah, so I think there's like three little points in that I'd like to address. So one is why not deconvert? Is that accurate? Okay,
Yes,
so upon my little bit of inspection from like all the way back to early patristic fathers, even they took the Bible in some cases figuratively and metaphorically. That kind of unveils some of the truth associated with operating in the world. So I don't really necessarily see a reason to. I guess the simple answer is I don't see a reason to dump the Christian belief. Not yet, I guess is the simple answer to that. There's another point in there. And I guess I'll kind of jump to like the last point that kind of came up in my mind. I'm sorry, I forgot the middle one because like you kind of asked like there was like three.
Yeah, actually I did too.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I guess the next one I'll kind of answer is the idea that I think science is great, and I just don't think it gives all the answers to the world. I think science measures what's invariable, right? So for example, matter is invariable, and I really don't need to wake up every morning and wonder if the sun is going to rise because I know that it's there, right? I with a degree of certainty I can predict that it will be there for quite some time, barring some crazy event. So I don't necessarily see science in conflict with religion unless it's taken to a dogmatic, fundamentalist, literalist point of view where God created the earth in 6 days. I think that science, interestingly enough, some of it got its start by people trying to, I guess, in a way, prove God's existence or understand the natural world to allude to the mind of God. Matter of fact, recently, I think it's interesting, and again, I'm not trying to take, what's his name, Maki Okaku, or I know I'm butchering his name. I'm really sorry, but he wrote a recent book called The God Equation.
Say it again, Eddie.
Michio Kaku.
The physicist. And yeah. I just love it because I think he's alluding to something that's like the highest thing possible. So,
Hey, Jim, do you think that you mentioned a second ago that you don't believe that science provides necessarily the answers to everything? Do you think
Mhm.
that religion provides any answers where science fails to provide answers?
Uh, in a way, I would say it it does in some regards. I don't think they should be taken completely separate. I think one informs the other and the other informs the other in a lot of different ways, right? So we
Mhm.
talk about like a virtual engine, right? A dialectical process, like we have it. And I think science is and is, right? And in some cases, religion can be ought. If I were to
Okay.
put it as simply as I could.
So if I'm going to translate that in my brain
Yeah.
properly, are you suggesting that the answers that religion gives is how we ought to behave, or how we ought to interpret things, or how we ought to treat each other? Is that what you're saying when you say religion gives us answers?
It gives us a framework of some kind. Not, it may not be a perfect framework. I'm not going to sit here and say it's perfect. Um, but I would say it helps us move in a case through the world, not not is the world.
And I think the question was also directed to Eddie as well, right? Sonny, you wanted Eddie to answer that as well.
Yes, correct.
Why do you lean on the Christian label? I think is kind of the general direction.
Well, there's a lot of people in the chat that's heard me repeat this ad nauseum.
That's all right. You can do it one more time because it'll be the first time on this show.
Okay.
So it's
I'm a
brand new.
very, very philosophical person. I've been in philosophy of religion for, I don't know, over 10 years now. And I went through fundamentalism, like you were talking about, Sonny, the legalism, the fundamentalism, very conservative. Went through, which is what led to my deconstruction, the conflict between that and science. And I became agnostic for a short while, but that's what kind of sent me on the quest to learn about, is there a God? And I've always had this intuition or innate feeling that there was something greater. And I totally understand that could be from the indoctrination growing up, being so impressionable, excuse me, being so impressionable as a child. And it wasn't really a practicing Christian family, but they talked about Jesus and sent us all to this church. But it was a feeling that an intuition I just couldn't make myself unconvinced of. So I went on a journey to find out, if there is a God, who is this God? And after going through all the world religions, none of them made any sense to me, even Christianity. However, it seemed to make more sense than the rest of them. And the more that I learned about Christ and his teachings, and I was just, kind of mesmerized at how antithetical to the, the common practice at that time, a lot of his teachings were, or seemed to be at the time anyway. And um, I still had a lot of doubts. I didn't doubt that there was something. And that's when I got into philosophy of religion. And I felt, I ran into all these different arguments for a God in general. And I was, I don't think there is an argument to get you to God. I think it's a cumulative case. And uh, given all of these metaphysical arguments for God, I was just convinced that, at least deism was true. And the more that I studied about, epistemology, and I ended up becoming a Bayesian epistemologist. Basically, my epistemology is on probability and confidence in my beliefs. I don't really have certainty. And when I looked at the Bayesian analysis for the resurrection of Christ and the explanatory scope of the hypothesis, it was first from Swinburne, and it was extremely high. And I'm like, there's no way the probability is that high. Well, Tim McGrew, actually critiqued his and brought it down far lower than what it was. However, no other hypothesis given a Bayesian analysis, is as high as that. And so, given my epistemology, of which I didn't just choose to be a Bayesian, I've always found comfort in stats. I've always found comfort in, knowing something's safe because it's, a very small chance it could happen. And I've always kind of held to what's more plausible versus what's not what's certain. And so, given that, I'm not certain that Christianity is true. I'm not certain that Jesus, fits into the God of the universe. If Christianity was falsified tomorrow, I'd still be a deist because I'm thoroughly convinced by the metaphysical arguments. And I think that goes into one of the questions Bryce was asking was, are there answers that religion can answer that science can't? And absolutely. Science can't answer metaphysical. It's above the spectrum of investigation. The metaphysical is about being. It's more about the why than it is the how. And science studies the how. And we can't get to the why, which leads into Jim's problem that he was talking about, the is-ought problem. Science says it is, but we obviously have oughts. And given just science and naturalism, there's a gap there. How do you get to the ought from the is, which is one of the classical problems? I think the God hypothesis answers a lot of questions. It's, for nothing more, if one wants to hold on to the God hypothesis as an explanation, I don't see an issue with people having, a hypothesis that explains all these things. It doesn't seem to be, could even be explained by science.
So that
and the liberal Christian thing, the reason I was making a face about that is I went to the fundamentalist church I went to. It was worse to be a progressive or liberal Christian than to be an atheist. And that was kind of like the mind games that they played. So every time somebody says liberal or progressive, I'm like, no, traditionally a progressive.
Going to hell, right?
Traditionally
you're on a faster
progressive
train to hell than the atheists are.
But also, real quick, traditionally progressive Christians were those who denied any supernatural thing with Christ. So it would be your Christ seminar or the Jesus seminar. These skeptical Christian groups. That's typically what a progressive Christian was.
So we were about to bore Oz to tears there, but I do want to bring him in. But I'm curious because Kilo Doggy One asked the question, and I think it's appropriate for both Jim and Eddie, given what you said. Can we come to oughts without God?
I don't know how. That's what the is-ought problem is.
So Jim is nodding yes, and you're saying no. So go ahead.
So a lot of times people misunderstand what the is-ought problem is. The is-ought problem is without, if we're left with just science tells us what is. Mm-hmm. We can't get to what we ought to do just by looking at what is. There's a gap there. And to go from that to an ought is the reason we have all of the meta-ethical arguments that we have, even on the naturalist side, that, you've got subjectivism, relativism, cultural relativism. I mean, there's cognitivism, non-cognitivism. There's like tons and tons of different meta-ethical views because they're trying to find a way to bridge the is-ought gap. And so some people just deny it and say there's no problem there. What there really is, because if things are this way, yet we're going to say we ought to do this. I mean, we ought to do science. Most people would agree with that. Why ought we to do science? I mean, we can say technology and advancement and things like that. Why ought we do that? So it's really a very deep philosophical argument that academics have been arguing for a while, and I don't think I could do it justice here in a few minutes.
Now, you and I would probably disagree on that point, but I think what would be more interesting is to hear from Jim, because he was making some gestures while you were talking. So what do you think about that question, Jim? Can we derive oughts without God?
Yes, we the short answer is yes. We can derive oughts without God.
How?
I mean, how?
Hold on, real quick. I'm not saying we can't derive oughts. That's not what I'm saying. How do we get from what is given science to what we ought to do? Because a lot of people appeal to science for what he is. How do we get to that ought from science? If somebody believes in moral realism, they don't have to believe in God to believe in moral realism. We can believe there's moral oughts and just be Platonist or something.
Jim?
The short answer is you can get to oughts without a God. I would say that
we ought to treat each other fairly. Would you agree that that is a true statement?
I mean, that is a fundamentally true statement, yes. Now,
and that's true whether a God exists or not?
Yes, it would be true without the existence of a God. Now, so I don't want to, I want to pull us away from the idea of a God, and I want to push this more towards a wisdom tradition or a religious tradition. Because in that you have these processes that enable us to effectively learn some of these maybe these oughts or something like that, right? Because again, it's not necessarily scientific. So for example, like let's go to maybe a leadership tradition. Okay. And the reason why I would point to that is because leadership is, people say it's an art, right? And that's why we always hear in our language a difference between art and like the art and the science, right? And so I would sit here and say I'd pull it away from God. And I would look at traditions and frameworks, particularly wisdom traditions and frameworks that help us derive some form of oughts.
Okay. Oz, you've been pretty silent over there, but first of all, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Like I shared the other night, was it 2-3 nights ago, whatever. I feel like I hit the bottom. I bottomed out, as far as the emotions and the anger and all that. So last 2 days, 3 days, whatever, I've kind of felt like a different, in a good way, a new person. So Saturday's gonna be tough. It's the day of the services and everything. But but thank you guys. It's having this community, being able to come on here, and keep this crazy brain active and thinking and distracted has been a huge help and relief. So I love all y'all.
And I wanted to invite you on here because I know that this is a form of therapeutic. This is cathartic for you. Everyone deals with tragedy in a different way, and if this is helping you in any way, I want to help you be a part of it. And you can participate as much as or as little as you want, but you are in our thoughts, and I'm glad you're here. What did you think about the show tonight?
Well, I was trying to get on my text shit all figured. I was trying to listen in, and obviously we have, and I've spent a lot of time talking to both Jim and Eddie, whether it's on YouTube or Discords, phone calls, Skype calls, any of all those things. But something did stick out to me, that maybe I'd heard it before from Jim, but maybe he just didn't say it the way he said it tonight. But he said something about the founding fathers or the patriotic fathers, and that they found importance in the book being the Bible, and if they do, then why should we not? We shouldn't just dump it or throw it out or something along those lines. So before I go any further, Jim, can you restate that for me?
You are the epitome of I'm not going to say it anyway.
Get him, Oz. Get him.
You like to stir the pot. I was going to put something different in the pot, though. It wasn't going to be anything. It was going to be something different. So here's what I'll say. The founding fathers, Craig is absolutely spot on. Many of the founding fathers were not religious in the terms of like believing in a theistic God. Now, they did understand the importance of religion. and the importance of some of the religious ideas that were found in them. I would point to John Adams specifically on that example. Jefferson, I would say, is a borderline atheist, even though some people put him in the deist camp. Madison, also borderline atheist, and pushed him into the deist camp as well. But they also realized the utility of religion for people, and it's not because they're dumb or anything. There's these ideas of truth within them.
And also how popular, we talk about the idea of normalizing atheism in 2021. Certainly in the 1700s and 1800s, publicly identifying as an atheist would not have won you any votes, much less any friends, I would imagine.
Benjamin Franklin was an atheist. He was very outspoken, and he was loved in many ways. So he might be an outlier, right? And I'll grant that.
I actually didn't know
was
that
probably
he was
more
an
on the outlier.
I mean, I believed that he was an atheist, but I don't know. Is he on record of actually saying that?
I remember reading something in a paper that said that he was pretty much an atheist. It came out.
He was very anti-theist, or
like
he
hated it.
Religion. Yeah, quite a few of them were, because you're coming out of Enlightenment, and deism was very, very popular and sweeping through. So there was a lot of rebuffing to Puritanism, really, because that's where we got the fundamentalism we have today. It's actually stems from John Darby Nelson, or John Nelson Darby. Darbyism is what they call it, early 19th century. And the Puritans are the ones who were bringing that over here, and they rebuffed it, pretty harshly. Quite a few of them did.
And if I can jump back in there, so Jim, is the founding fathers pointing to the book or using the book? Is that like one of the main influencers of you believing in the Bible God Yahweh? Is that one of the main determinations?
I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, it may be.
Okay. Do you have one or two things that stick out that hold you to, if you've deconstructed your belief or your faith, or
yeah. Okay. If I were to deconstruct my faith, I would pretty much just boil down that I had personal experiences that were hallucinations. That would be the quickest way to deconstruct me.
So you said that really fast.
You said they were hallucinations, or they were not?
Well, the only way to sit there and say that I would the quickest way to deconstruction would be to sit there and say that my personal experiences or revelations or something like that with some higher power is effectively an hallucination.
Okay, so if that's the case, what was your methodology? What methods did you use to confirm that was not hallucination?
I mean, yeah, by all intents and purposes, according to science, it is an hallucination.
Okay, so then where would that leave us?
I don't know.
So hallucinations are naturally occurring in people, right? Not necessarily indicative of supernatural causation. So if we know that
they are naturally occurring. I'm not saying they're not.
So if we know that hallucinations are naturally occurring, would it not make more sense to lean on the naturalistic explanation until we could confirm supernatural causation?
Maybe.
May I say something on
Yes.
this?
I had one last question, and I'll butt out.
Yep.
Oh God. I'm just waiting for the question because I think it's coming.
I was writing things down and taking notes. So, where'd it go? Hold on. Oh, there it is. So for you or anyone that, because you're not the only person I've ever talked to that has had, visions or experiences, and they say this, this is what is convinces me, or part of what convinces me. How could we tell even if it's not? We couldn't tell that it was or was not a hallucination. Still, how can we? How do I want to say this? How do we make that a reason to warrant a belief, even if we can't prove that it was not a hallucination? How do we warrant that?
Maybe it's useful, and not in a coping way, but it's useful in maybe a propelling way.
Even if it may not be true.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said perennial truths, right? Perennial truths don't have to actually be proven scientifically. They're an idea of everlasting or consistent or reappearing truth.
And
that's
just
found
so
in mythology.
Just so I hear him, I see him in the chat, but I missed his first question. So Pasta, go ahead and ask your question again, because I can't find it.
Yeah, I'm not watching the chat. I'm too ADHD. I can't.
He's asked several questions actually, guys.
Do both.
He's been chomping at the bits.
Can I chime in on the religious thing? So I've had what I would to believe religious experiences. I wouldn't say hallucinations because I didn't actually see something. But I can tell you that I've had religious experiences and I've had lots of hallucinations on drugs. And the religious experiences were nothing like what I experienced on drugs, or hallucinations, or what I thought at one time may have been religious experiences on drugs. They were few and far in between, unprompted, unseeking, nothing crazy, just kind of at odd times, just quote unquote be filled with the Spirit, which I don't know what people mean by that, but I don't no speaking in tongues or nothing like that. Just this overwhelming warmth and joy, and just it was like almost immediately knowing it was from God when I wasn't even prompting for it, But there's been lots of studies done on religious experience, and I think to just kind of dismiss it or try to chalk it up to naturalism, I think we need to kind of be careful there, because it is considered a phenomenon. Because there's a lot of people. Now, I'm not saying it's supernatural.
How long is this show? How long is this show?
As long as we wanted to. It's normally.
I'm not saying that confirms it's supernatural, but it is it's not understood what these religious experiences are.
You're going to open this show up to like a 2.5-3 hour show, because now
I would just point you to Craig Keener's studies on it. I would point you to, there's several people that's done significant studies. There's psychologists that's done, lots of psychologists that's done studies on these things. And it is a phenomenon. We don't have the answer for it to just say it's naturalistic, but let's take it back a step further. Well, let's say it is a hallucination. How do you explain people having these hallucinations and so many people having them naturalistically? What is it? We can't explain what hallucinations are.
Go ahead, Sonny.
Okay, so we can't say that they are hallucinations in particular. What we do say is that it is a function of the brain. It is a particular function of the brain. So it is naturalistic. And that's what psychologists are studying, is what creates this function of the brain, what creates this feeling, what creates this phenomenon that people are self-describing as, because that's the key. People are self-describing things. Now, there are tests that that you could do on the brain. I'm not a neuropsychologist, so I'm not really key on that side of it. But there are tests that are being done on what parts of the brain are being triggered or being highlighted when certain things are either said or indicated. And we're seeing that these are actually processes of the brain. So as soon as we can prove that there is something supernatural, and then we can test the supernatural, then we can start saying that something is supernatural. Until that point, everything is leading to processes of the brain. And the fact that there are multiple people who are having this and that we can measure it, we're able to show that it is actually processes.
It proves that they all have
But
brains.
wait a minute. But hold on, that's an issue. Because we're assuming some type of reductionism. We're denying that any dualism could be true. If we just say it's a product of the brain, that's assuming physicalism. That's assuming that the brain and the mind are just the same. I mean, that's an extreme reductionism.
It's
which by the way,
it's taking
that
the
is
only thing that you can measure. You're taking something that you can measure, and you're removing the things that you cannot measure. You're taking things that, because science is really a study of reality, the things that we can test. So it's not that we're trying to remove anything from the discussion. We are testing that we can test. We're testing that is observable, measurable, and that we can make specific predictions on.
Right.
When we're seeing that.
Let me jump in for a second.
Well,
I'll go ahead and
quick.
I'll let you make this point, Eddie,
Okay.
but I just want to say I will be wrapping up in a minute, and then I do have to get to Pasta Mike. His question will be last because I wanted, but go ahead and respond to that, and then we'll get to Pasta Mike, and then we'll wrap it up.
I mean, I know, obviously you're familiar with the mind-body problem, right?
So this is the philosophical position that we can only the position you're arguing for is
no. It's trying to bridge the mind-body problem. Is how can the mind, which
be an
is
emergent property of
it's not a substance or material thing like the brain. So when we draw correlations, like in neuroscience has been plagued with a lot of issues. I love neuroscience, and don't get me wrong, I love science, but neuroscience has been plagued with a lot of issues because of correlations to what they thought, and even with like the whole chemical imbalance, that whole thing that started up because they thought that certain chemicals in the brain were responsible for just one thing or just responsible for another thing. And then they find that, no, wait a minute, that's why nobody holds to this chemical imbalance anymore. But
well,
when
let me push back on that for a minute, because it's actually the case that certain neurotransmitters in the brain, hormones, they are responsible for certain emotions. That is
but
is
not
confirmed.
just that. There was actually
certain
a name
combinations of different neurotransmitters can result in behaviors.
There was actually a name for it where they were focusing on these neurotransmitters, the neuroepinephrine, the dopamines, and the
adrenaline,
serotonin,
same
where
thing.
they were real singular focused on these different things, and then they realized that over doing studies in neuroscience and all, that's where the whole chemical imbalance came from. And then we found out that they're responsible for a lot more different areas of the brain than what originally was thought. But my point is to assume that because we can draw a correlation, it is a correlation causation fallacy. We can't say because this side of the brain lights up, therefore there's no mind, there's no soul, there's none of this. That's just assuming naturalism, and that's begging the question.
We could talk about this all day long, and I suspect we will continue to talk about this in the Discord. I have a few things to say about that last statement you just made, Eddie, and it looks like Sonny does too. But I want to let Pasta Mike get his question in. He wants to know if we could be wrong.
Hold on, Pasta Mike. He has the best question of the year. He has the best question.
Would you like to read it in his voice?
I'll let him do it. I'll let him do it in a second. No, I actually just wanted to do that because that's what Kanye would do, and I know Pasta's been waiting for his question. So
that's a sexy picture of Pasta right there.
Yeah. So if we could be wrong about a belief so important it impacts our lives while living on this earth, why hold the belief? And are we using the same standards of evidence with other claims? Thank you, Pasta Mike. It's a great question.
I'm not.
Boom, roasted.
No, I'm trying to interpret it.
Mike
charitably. I'm not. What was? Can you put it back up there?
Yeah, I think that what he's asking is if we could be wrong, like why believe it if you're going to acknowledge that you're just as likely to be wrong? And then the second part of it is, are we using the same standards for the religious belief as we use with the belief in like gravity, for example, or evolution? Because I know that you and Jim both adhere to science, and you believe that, you know, you accept the scientific claims, but do you evaluate the religious claims using the same?
I think we're justified. I think first of all, I don't know what the belief part of it is so important about, because if I stopped believing tomorrow, I'd still live my life just like I do. But I think that to say that we know gravity is real and all these things is to say that we experience gravity.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same token, if somebody believes that they had a religious experience and it's unexplainable by science, or you know, it's considered a phenomenon or anything, even if it's, there's people who's argued, there's professionals that's argued that even if it's a hallucination, it still could be something supernatural. I don't see why that would mean that, you know, we should just abandon what we experience. Matter of fact, in philosophy, intuition or your experience is a justified position until a defeater is presented. So if you have an experience and you think it's true and no one's presented a overwhelming defeater, then you're justified in holding that.
Hey, Eddie, real quick. If Sonny,
that is true in philosophy. Yes, I've spent many years in philosophy. I promise you, that's what intuition is.
Just give me 1 second. I'll let you guys do the philosophy thing and I'll shut the fuck up. So whether you do or do not have experience, or did or did not have an experience, I always find it very interesting when I hear any theist or Christian, whatever, say what you said, that even if I found out tomorrow that was absolutely wrong and this shit's not real, it would not change the way that I live my life. Then what is the necessity? Why believe? Why is it there? Why defend it?
Because you're assuming I can just change my belief overnight. If I'm convinced of something that we don't get to pick all of our beliefs.
That's not what you said, Eddie. That's not what you said. Hold on, chill, bro. I'm just asking questions. All I'm saying is, you said if I found out tomorrow that it wasn't real, so now you know it's not a belief. You know that it's not real, that it would not impact the way you live your daily life. Then why believe at all ever?
Because I don't choose to believe. That's not a choice I have. I find myself convinced of it.
Yeah,
I don't do good things because I'm a Christian. I do good things because I was taught to do good things.
So let me be more clear. That's my fault. I apologize. So why believe in something that is not changing? Like, if this God isn't making an impact in your life and changing the way you live your life or standards or whatever it is, and you would be the same version of yourself with God than you would be without God, what is the necessary? Why is that God a necessity?
Because
I don't think I would say that I don't know if that's a great question the way you put it that way, because I'm convinced that beliefs are not choices and that they're just a matter of what we're convinced is true.
Right, and I'm trying to get away from that. But why would lifestyle, decision making,
none of that would change?
Yeah, he said it wouldn't.
No, none of that would change.
Yes, I understand. That's what I'm saying. How could it not change? If the God is real, then there should be a separation between a believer and a non-believer. But then if we find out that it's not, then how would a lifestyle not change?
Well, you got to understand, we grew up in a heavily Judeo-Christian Western society. So we all tend to have the same kind of ideas of what right and wrong is. And I was taught by my parents what right and wrong was, and we have certain intuitions about it. The only difference of having a belief in God makes in my life is that because I believe God is real, which I don't feel like I have control over that without some kind of overwhelming defeater, I pray to God and I give him the proper worship. That's it. Nothing's different. I wouldn't live. The only difference in my life would be I wouldn't spend time praying. I wouldn't spend time trying to learn more about God, and I wouldn't spend time trying to give him the worship that I think that I should be giving him. That's it. That's the only
Sonny,
difference.
go ahead and react to that because people
Okay,
love
let
the
me-
reactions. And then
Well,
I'm gonna
Sorry.
yeah,
wrap
she
it up.
she deserves to talk.
good.
She's been very good and quiet. And I want to give her the last word because she, even on what I was talking about earlier, because she has been extremely patient and charitable.
And yes, Sonny, I'm sorry, I jumped right in there.
No. You're all of y'all are great. It's like my brain is going into little volcano eruptions as we're going on this. So, and I don't hide it well. Our beliefs impact our actions. And so every time that your belief changes, your actions change. So I can't say that I agree with you that if you were to suddenly believe or suddenly recognize that or have some epiphany that your belief was no longer valid, I think the way that you would live your life would completely change. And I can say that not only from my own personal experiences, which is just for me, but from what we see empirically through studies. I mean, people tend to put their political values, how they vote, how they interact with other people through the lens of their beliefs, because our knowledge is a subset of our beliefs, and it's going to empirically change how we act.
Guys,
So
we can go on. We can go on about this, and I sense
Yeah,
that
just the last thing. She's absolutely correct. It's hard for me to say what I would do and what I wouldn't do without certain beliefs, but I do want you to know, Sonny, I am not the Christian that feels the presence of God. I'm not the kind of Christian. I don't have feelings. I don't have like God's close, God's near, and all of this. I
well, I hope
literally
you have
go
feelings.
well, you know what I mean.
That's very important.
You know what I mean. So I kind of just, it's like a liturgical thing. I just go through more or less the motions of what I think that is, proper for if a God existed. But I can tell you, my mother was extremely loving and taught us to be extremely loving. And I just really don't see how that would, kind of change. Not that I'm perfect or nothing, but that is a very fair point, Sonny.
Eddie, I
Yeah.
thought you were giving Sonny the last word.
I was actually giving her a praise.
I am actually.
I had to give her a praise because she was absolutely spot on about that. I can't know what I really would do, and she's in a position to do it, to know. So
Eddie,
But
this is my
Bryce.
show, and I will get the last word. The Bryce is right. This was a great conversation. Thank you. This was a wonderful conversation, and this hopefully it gave a lot of the first-time viewers kind of a taste of what our after parties are like in the Discord. So if you want to be a part of that, hop in the Discord with us after every TANG show. If you're interested in having better conversations, the Atheist Network group is hosting a meetup called Better, October 9th and 10th at the Allen County War Memorial Coliseum in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Special guests include Seth Andrews, Dr. Josh Bowen, T-Jump, Anthony Magnabosco, Cynthia McDonald, and Dave Warnock. Reservations are available now at www.tart.live. I got that right, didn't I ask? www.tart.live. I don't know why I can't say it properly. The link will be in the description. And I really want to thank James Benton for coming up in here, Jim, and dealing with that onslaught. And also Eddie for kind of giving him a little bit of backup, although I feel like you two disagreed more than you agreed almost. But
we're going to talk later.
It's all good. Diversity of opinion in here. That's what this is all about. And
Christian on Christian crime. Christian on Christian crime.
Yeah, I'll get an earful later for sure.
We're gonna have to talk about what the kind of messages that you were getting in Facebook on the Discord. But for any of you in the chat, if you would like to continue the discussion, join us in the Discord. And if you've enjoyed the show, please do me a favor, hit the like button. You can catch me here on TANG Weekly, Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe to TANG, the Atheist Network group, for more awesome secular content. And for Oz, producer Wes, Sonny, my name is Bryce Aroni, and I've changed my ending because a couple of people were getting offended by the last one. So have a good morning, have a good night, and I will see you next time on The Bryce is Right. Peace out.